In the last session, we looked at some principles or ideas for how to make Bible lessons, especially Bible lessons in middle and high school, more engaging. That is, how to get students more involved in their learning rather than just sitting passively and trying to take in information. In this session, I would like to give some examples of how this can be done. In this video, I want to give an example, and we want to put into practice some of the things we've been talking about. Remember, though, we cannot guarantee student engagement. You're still going to have some kids who are out to lunch, where the lights are on but nobody's home, where the wheel's spinning but the hamster's dead, where there's too much yardage between the goalposts, or whatever metaphor you want to use. And these examples I'm going to give you are not going to showcase an essential element of an engaging lesson. That essential element is the relationship you build with your students. If they know you care, they're going to be more likely to care about what you teach. But these sample lessons should give you some ideas of ways you can teach your Bible lessons in a way that's more likely to stimulate student engagement and focus. Now, an important element of this is also the concept that you are planning for a day's lesson as a single coherent unit. You see, what we tend to do in Bible class, but in other classes, is the period begins, we start lecturing, the bell rings at the end of the period, we just quit there. And tomorrow we just pick up where we left off with the lecture and just keep on going. It's like, okay, you have like a 7 or 8 hour long lecture that's just broken up into 50-minute segments. What I'm encouraging you to do instead is to think about each day as a single unit, that you have a lesson for the day that has a beginning, middle, and an end, and don't just see it as part of a 8 hour long lecture. So for this example, let's say that you're teaching a New Testament survey course, and the lesson for the day is the Beatitudes in Matthew 5. First, let's look at how you might do this in the more traditional way. So we have here, okay, on the left side you're going to see what I write on the board. On the right side here are notes that you have handed out to the students. Okay, you've handed them out the notes page. So as we begin, we'd start off by saying, okay, let's look at Matthew 5. The first Beatitude says, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." So you turn around and you write that on the board. The students fill in the blanks on their worksheet. You wait a minute for them to get that written down. Then you start explaining. You say, okay, now what does it mean to be poor in spirit? We'll look up some Bible verses. Let's look at Psalm 51. Let's look at Isaiah 66. Let's look at some other passages, and maybe you go through and you maybe have students read passages, but for the most part you're lecturing, you're explaining, okay, and you come down to the conclusion. So we might say, okay, after we've read those verses, now what it means to be poor in spirit is that we see ourselves as spiritually poor. So you write that on the board, the students copy that down. Now, what does it mean, the kingdom of heaven? What is that talking about? Let's look at some verses. So you give some verses, and you look at those, and you end up that you say, okay, so what Jesus means here by the kingdom of heaven is that's the presence of God. That's where God is. And so that's what it means here when we're talking about the poor in spirit, that theirs is the kingdom of heaven. It means that those who are poor in spirit, those who see themselves as spiritually poor, have the presence of God with them. Now I might say here parenthetically, please don't critique my Bible interpretation, okay? But let's just give this as an example. Now, so let's start on the second Beatitude. Okay, we read that in the text. "Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted." So you write that on the board, and the students fill in their blanks. And so on, and you go through all 8 of the Beatitudes that way. Where the students have their notes, they fill in the blanks, you're writing things on the board. Basically, you write on the board what you want them to write in their notes. And then it comes time for the test. Okay, so at the end of the unit or whatever, you're going to have a test on the Beatitudes, and your test on the Beatitudes is primarily going to be something like this, where you have like maybe a matching. Match the blessing with the characteristic. So blessed are the poor in spirit, and they pick out which of those on the right side goes with it. And so you go on through, okay? It's a factual recall type of test. Now, like I say, this is traditionally the way that I believe most of us have taught Bible. What I want to do is to look at some different ways, some ways that might get the students more active, more engaged, and also might encourage them to learn more. Because I'll tell you, what you see is especially if you're giving tests like this one, you're going to find that that's what the students take away from the class, that they can match the blessing with the characteristic. They're not real sure what it means. They don't know how it applies to their life, but they can tell you poor in spirit goes with the kingdom of heaven. Okay, that they know that those two match together, and probably when they study for the test, they take that handout that you gave them, and they've just memorized that handout. Okay, but let's think about some ways that they might be more engaged. One approach is what's called the Jigsaw Lesson. A Jigsaw lesson is useful in a lot of areas, okay, because what you do is you divide the class into groups. Each group studies one particular element of the lesson, one particular thing, and so each group in a sense becomes an expert on that particular element. Then you take those groups and you mix them up so that you have a new set of groups, but each new set of groups has one person from each of the old groups, so that then they put their ideas together. What they came up with in their individual groups and their expert groups, they share with the others. So on the Beatitudes, you might divide your class into 8 groups. There are 8 Beatitudes. Okay? So you divide the class into 8 groups. And for each Beatitude, you give them a handout. So each of those small groups gets a handout. Something like this. It would have cross-references, it would have some questions, and have them ask something. But you give them this, and each of them has one of these. So they look up the references in their small groups, and they talk together. What does it mean to be poor in spirit based on those passages? Then what is the kingdom of heaven? And especially, is it something that's only in the future? So you have them look up these verses and have them decide, okay, what do they think the kingdom of heaven means? So you might give that group 10 minutes or so to do this. Okay? And so they go through that. Then, after they've done that, you regroup them. Now you make larger groups, but you have groups that have 8 students in each one, and each group has 1 student from each Beatitude. So a group has all 8 Beatitudes within it. And then they share with each other. Okay, what did our group come up with the first Beatitude means? Another student says, okay, here's what we decided that the second Beatitude means, and so on. And so they share with each other, they take notes from each other, they write that down among themselves. Then at the end, you bring your class back together, and then the teacher asks questions about the text. Okay, what was this first Beatitude? What did you all come up with? And so you ask them questions about that. And you might also deal with the overall issues. Well, why did Jesus begin his sermon with the Beatitudes? And then you also think, well, can we draw all 8 Beatitudes together? Is there a common theme? Okay. So that would be a lesson on the Beatitudes. Then you have an assessment. Okay. The assessment, remember, in the previous one was matching. In this one, our assessment is going to be more like this. Using your Bible, choose one of the Beatitudes in Matthew 5 and apply it to modern life. When you're asking them, okay, you pick out one of the Beatitudes and tell me how it would apply in modern life. And you give them examples. What would it mean for a high school student in Woodstock to be meek or to inherit the earth? What would that look like? So you're asking them now, they have to understand what those Beatitudes mean, because you're not going to accept answers that are just kind of off the wall and have no relevance at all. But they are then applying it and showing that they can understand how those Beatitudes apply to their life. So this is a different approach to teaching the same content. You're still teaching them and having them understand what the Beatitudes mean, but it's a different approach to it. Another example, okay, let's think of a different approach to teaching the same content. You've heard about flipped learning. So let's think about this, the flipped format. You might make a video ahead of time where you go through the basic meanings of the Beatitudes. Basically, you boil down a lecture into a 10-minute or so video. And so you give them, maybe you give them notes, handout notes ahead of time. Okay, when they watch the video, here's what they're supposed to listen for. You go over the basic meanings of the Beatitudes. Then when they come to class the next day, remember in the flipped format, that's their homework. That's what they do for homework. So they come to class the next day, and you have a brief 5-question quiz on that video. This could be the matching. Okay, but the idea is you want to be sure that they have watched the video. So just a real brief quiz, not a major test, just, okay, let's see if you watched the video. Then in the class, you divide the class into 8 groups, okay, 1 for each Beatitude again. And each group, though, in this case, they come up with a skit to illustrate that Beatitude, to illustrate what it looks like, especially in modern life, how it would view, what it would look like, or some way to illustrate that Beatitude in modern life. So you give each group a few minutes to come up with that, then you do those for each other. That's your class session. Again, it's getting the students involved, it's getting them to demonstrate that they understand what that Beatitude actually means. So that's a different type of lesson on the same content. Another one, let's say that you still want to do a more traditional lecture. We can do that. In this case, though, the notes that you hand out to the students, it's this open outline. Okay, it's not the fill-in-the-blank type of thing. We want to get away from that because the fill-in-the-blank thing, the students don't have to listen for much except when they need to fill in the blank. But in this case, okay, here's the outline that you give them. First Beatitude, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. So you talk for a few minutes, you explain, okay, what does this mean? Bring up the cross-references, bring up some of those things, give the main points. But then, after you've done that one, just 3, 4, 5 minutes on that one at the most, then have the students turn to the person next to them to confirm what they should have in their notes. What did they come up with as the main points? Don't write stuff on the board for them to copy. Okay, that defeats the purpose. You want them to be listening, and you want them to start thinking, okay, what are the main points? Now that takes training. That was in a different session. But the idea is at this point that they are listening, they're getting the main points, and then they're talking about it with somebody else briefly. Okay, what does this mean? And they explain it to one another. Just give them a couple of minutes on that, then go through the other Beatitudes. And you might finish up your lesson with a class discussion. How do you apply these in your lives? What does it look like at CCS for students to be poor in spirit? And again, at the end of the unit, you could have the same type of assessment that we mentioned in the previous one, okay, where you're asking them, pick out a Beatitude, explain how it applies in modern life. So these are just 3 ways that you can make your Bible lessons more engaging, where the students can become less passive, they can be more active in their learning, they're thinking about Bible content more than just passively taking it in, and they're learning how to apply it. And this is what we want. We want our students to leave our classes being able to apply and live out our Bible teaching. So I hope this is helpful. There are many other ways that you could teach the Bible lessons, but I hope this is helpful for you, and I look forward to seeing how the Lord is going to use you to teach engaging Bible lessons to your students.